Welcome to the Friday Harbor Film Festival. Today's Q&A focuses on two films about the salmon and removal of dams on the Elwha River on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. This was the largest dam removal project yet undertaken in North America. We hope to be joined by one of our directors, Shane Anderson, but we are joined today by Jennifer Galvin, the director and producer of The Memory of Fish. In case Shane does join us, Shane's is a short film looking at the revival of wild summer steelhead, which had been thought to be extirpated prior to the dam removal. Shane was a professional downhill skier turned documentary filmmaker. He's worked in film and television in LA, and his production company is North Fork Studios. And Jennifer's documentary follows Dick Goen, a man who is intimate with the Elwha River and the fish whose home it is. Dick's goal was to bring the salmon home. Jennifer is a scientist trained in epidemiology, and she forged the discipline of ocean and human health prior to her involvement with film. It's been said that she is a Swiss Army knife, a multi-tool for scientific and philanthropic organizations, a researcher and advocate, a filmmaker, and a deep thinker. Welcome, both of you, today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Shane. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey,
Right.
Shane.
Hey,
So I guess I would start by asking each of you, in whatever order you prefer, to let us know, tell us what set the stage for the making of each of your films.
Jen?
Okay, I'll go first since mine's a little bit older than Shane's, which is a good timeline. I had a dear friend in graduate school who knew Dick Goen, and Dick was kind of his mentor. And so fast forward probably about 10 or 11 years, in 2009, my friend Phil Johnson called me and said, I think it's time to make a film about Dick Goen and the Elwha River. It's looking like the dams might be able to come down. And so one thing kind of led to the next, and Dick agreed. He hadn't agreed to filmmakers before, so I was really honored that he said yes and trusted me with the story, and shot the story from 2010 to 2015, and it premiered in 2016.
Great. How about you, Shane?
So my friend John McMillan's been working on the Elwha as a scientist for probably the past 15 years, and he specializes in steelhead and studying steelhead. And so he was really excited about the recolonization of steelhead in the upper river. And we'd been talking about wanting to document that recolonization after dam removal for quite some time. But there was a lot of logistics involved because it involves a 20-mile hike into the wilderness with a bunch of camera gear. So basically, we partnered with Trout Unlimited to do this riverscape in the Olympic National Park and the Elwha tribes to document this riverscape snorkel series up there. So they were able to provide the mules and the llamas to get our equipment up there.
Fantastic. What were some of the best experiences you guys each had in the filming of these projects?
For me, I just felt really lucky to be able to spend so much time with Dick and Marie Goen and spend so much time with him on the river, and to be able to document this story before, during, and after the dams came down. It was actually really fun, but kind of maybe crazy to get in the river after the dams came down because there was just a lot of debris flowing down, still rebar and cement and all kinds of stuff. But really my best memories were spending time with him.
Was he an exceptional person? Did he leave us on this planet a few years ago?
He did. Actually, it'll be 6 years that he's been gone in April 12th. But I'm still in close touch with his wife, Marie, who still lives in Port Angeles, and his grandson, Kyle, who has since kind of shifted career paths and now works at a fly fishing shop.
Wow. How about you, Shane? What was extra special about making this film, or what sticks with you?
So it was probably day 2 of the film when we got to go into this really remote canyon in the headwaters, which was named Goen Canyon. So there's a little connection there.
That's great.
And it was one of the most incredible places I've ever been. It was about a 7-mile reach, and most of the canyon was 200 to 300 foot vertical cliffs on either side with these fern grottos coming out and these just aquamarine pools that were full of these sea run, rainbow trout that we know as steelhead. And to see that firsthand and the abundance of life in this just magically wild canyon, it gave me some much needed hope. Because I work on a lot of salmon and river issues that are a little depressing sometimes in the Northwest. So to see that kind of recovery in such an amazing place, and to know that here in Washington there's still places like that left, and that there is that hope out there, was pretty much life changing.
Wow. And to see it and feel it and breathe it firsthand for both of you, to be in such a magical place. How do you, well, you made films about it, but do you feel like it's even possible to convey that personal experience in words or in any other form? Or is it just something that the experience of it itself is not conveyable, that we have to go there in order to understand it?
I don't know. I mean, I hope it comes across in the work that I do, kind of that collective dimension of being a scientist and an artist, a filmmaker. And one of the things I really tried to do with The Memory of Fish was to make sure that it had a real, emotional hook, and that we felt like we really could get inside the mind and the heart of this main character. And as he was kind of, fighting for the fish that he loved. So, I hope that the film feels poetic and feels emotional to people, so that people remember what they love too.
It sure did that for me. I thought it was very well done. I fell in love with Dick Gowen and his wife.
No, so cute.
Do you guys each have any questions for each other?
Oh my goodness.
How long did the film take, Jen?
Let's see. Well, I started it in 2009, the idea of it, and then it released in 2016. So, it's a good, 6-7 year project, which feels like a long time, but it's not that unusual for documentaries. It just takes a long time sometimes to get films made. But for me, I really wanted to make sure that I didn't zoom in too closely in terms of time on the story. I wanted to kind of make sure I captured the before, during, and after the dams were removed, to see a fuller story. Sometimes if you focus on too short of a time period, sometimes you miss the story. And I certainly didn't know that, Dick was going to be, falling ill and pass away before the film was finished when I started it. So, yeah. Well, Shane, tell me what you're working on now. See, we're lucky to have Shane, because I work on different kinds of films, but Shane is the river master when it comes to filmmaking. So I want to know what he's working on and what he thinks is important for the Pacific Northwest right now. What's going on out there?
Yeah, so I was asking that question because I most of my documentaries I'm kind of like running and gunning, like getting them done within a year and a half, 2 years at the most. And I've recently taken on this giant project, documenting the Klamath Dam removals, and that's going to be a minimum of 4 years, and we might kind of do a sequel, which would probably be another 4 years. And uh, it's an incredible story. I mean, there's been a ton of documentation and films about the Klamath, but this one's pretty unprecedented just because of the scale and the scope. The largest river restoration in history, 400 miles of habitat going to be opened. Um, the problems with toxic algae blooms and fish disease that could be solved by the removal of these dams. So, and just the backstory, I mean, it's a real story of perseverance. This kind of David and Goliath story of you know going up against corporate America to remove these dams, and these small communities in the Klamath, and showing up at shareholders meetings in Scotland, and putting the pressure on Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, and really indigenous led too. And I'm it's a little overwhelming to think of that long timeline. So and then I of course want to get the story right and do it justice for everybody that's been involved, that spent 20 years of their life. So it's going to be this crazy cathartic experience when they come down, after
Yeah.
spending that much time on something.
Yeah.
that's the main one I'm working on. I'm also working on a film called The Lost Salmon about the plight of spring Chinook, and spent some time in San Juan Islands last year with Giles up there and the orcas, talking about the importance of spring Chinook specifically because there's some new research out where they found this gene called GREB1L, which makes spring Chinook very different and anciently evolved than fall Chinook, and they're literally going extinct in the wild. The wild spring Chinook, and it's like the most important salmon in all of salmon country, and we're down to hardly any wild fish left anywhere, and they could blink out in our lifetime. So that's that's on the back burner. I mean, I'm working on it, but COVID kind of slowed me down, so I'm getting ready to gear back up and hit it hard.
When you say you're working on it, do you mean a film about
Yeah,
spring Chinook salmon?
yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm doing that through Pacific Rivers, the organization I work with. We started filming last summer. I did about 6 months filming. Got to be up in Friday Harbor in the San Juans when the Super Pod showed up, and that was another life changing experience. Like to see them at sunset coming, all getting together and having a party out there. So yeah, gonna that one I'll probably try to finish by the end of the summer, and then also working in the Snake River system, starting a project with the Nez Perce tribe about those damn Snake River.
Wow, we need another hour on this Q&A. I've got questions for you. um, let's see. I have a question for Jennifer. So, how is your film now being used, The Memory of Fish, as a tool to protect waterways around the world?
So one of the things that was important to me when the film first came out, in addition to doing the festival tour and sort of convening different people around the film, was that I wanted to specifically did a tour for American rivers. So we did that. We kind of got kind of this screening tour off the ground with them and for them, and since it's been it's widely distributed on places like Amazon or iTunes, YouTube, that you can see it. But schools often screen it, organizations often screen it. So there's all sorts of people that enjoy hosting screenings of the film. So if you're interested, you can definitely reach out to me through thememoryoffish.com.
Oh, good. And then are you incorporating your work into music videos as well?
So this past year, I got the chance to make a music video for friends of mine here in New York who are just like these incredible jazz, like the vanguard jazz artists, who wanted to make a music video, but make it feel like a short film. And so I got to dabble in that world, which was really fun. I love experimental film and I love music. So that was a really fun project for me.
And what did you bring to the music video in terms of environmental conservation?
No, it was a totally different story. I just brought my film chops to it.
Gotcha. Well, there's always room to mingle, isn't there? Mingle, get to know, make a few bridges. And what do you think, Shane? Do we need to have some cross culture with art and conservation awareness?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know personally, yeah, I've been in this river salmon niche for a decade now. I'm also, looking forward to kind of exploring outside that box a little bit to incorporate, because we do need to reach out to different audiences for sure, and that's one thing I love about Jen's filmmaking is she brought a different perspective into the river culture, and it ended up being a beautiful, beautiful film.
Thanks.
Yeah, it feels like it broke boundaries. Shane, I was really struck watching your film, the underwater scenes, watching the beautiful waters and the underwater scapes and the fish. I mean, it just is otherworldly. And that was just in a few feet of water, not even in the ocean. I don't know if you did any of the snorkeling, but I'm sure watching those scenes, what did you think? I felt like it was just stunning. Made me want to be a fish there.
Yeah, I did all the underwater. That was kind of it was painful though. It was like it was probably a 10-hour day, and I was so cold by the end of that. And so like we kind of funny backstory. So I was in that reach with my friend John McMillan, who was also an amazing underwater photographer and river snorkeler. We were going into this canyon, which was kind of like this class 4 whitewater, which is kind of sketchy and with a snorkel. And I gave him my camera and we go through this rapid, and he wasn't really paying attention to where he was going and ended up smashing a rock right out of the get-go. And his snorkel went through his teeth, and we didn't know if we were going to have to call it a helicopter because it was like his bones were exposed. But he ended up toughing it out for the rest of the day. So all of that almost didn't exist. So if we would have had to call it a rescue.
So maybe the memories, the audience, the viewers of your film kind of get just the nice, happy, beautiful, I want to be a fish side. Okay, here's a question probably, maybe both of you can talk about, but there was some footage of Dick Goen at one of the public meetings or talks in your film, Jennifer. It was after I think it was an award thing or a talk in a big gymnasium. And there was a pro dams guy who told Dick that it was a fallacy. This was before the dams were brought down, that it was a fallacy that salmon would rebound. And he said he knew this based on a study. I don't know which study that was, but who funds those studies? Obviously, we've seen that is incorrect, that the Elwha Dam removal was a successful restoration project beyond anyone's expectations. So who funds those studies? What do you say to that moving forward? What do we learn from it? Are we still falling for these same type of tactics from naysayers?
Yeah, that was a really interesting scene. People have actually asked me if that scene was real, if we set that up in some way, but it really was real. And I love that it happened that way because it is a big question on people's minds. And that was a big question with the Elwha River restoration was how is this going to work? And can you restore a river after a century of it being dammed? So I'm glad that scene unfolded, not because I agreed with the guy that was confronting Dick Goen, but because I think, a lot of people feel that way. And, in terms of funding studies, I think it's always an important question to look and see who is funding what and who's behind certain causes and what their motivations are. Because if you understand that, that's kind of the way into finding some common ground. So I kind of always look at that as an opportunity rather than something that feels more like a conflict or tension and a real fight in terms of who's funding what. I think for me, I want to know how to talk to strangers, and I'm happy when people kind of voice those alternative opinions so that we can shine a light on it and really dig in with some more thoughtful answers so that more people understand and we're not just preaching to the choir.
Great answer. How about you, Shane? That was fantastic. Good perspective.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean that ideology exists in each one of these natural resource conflicts, no matter which dam it is or what river issue. I mean, we're seeing it in the Klamath right now. We've seen it throughout the years on the Klamath. I mean, there was a whole debate whether there was salmon that actually went up into the headwaters of the Klamath, despite photos that exist of tribal members from the Upper Klamath tribes with these salmon. And now some new genetic evidence shows there's fish bones found at all these ancient fishing sites that date back 6,000 years of both spring and fall Chinook. So, it's interesting because despite the science and despite just proof through photographs, there's still a lot of people out there that want to debate some of this stuff, whether they can come back, whether they were there, and it's just rooted in ideology, I think. And but I hope to showcase some of it as well in some of these upcoming projects, the both sides of the.
Great.
If you will.
Yeah, it feels like this just kind of two different schools of thought. I had another question. Maybe this is going too far out on a limb, but I feel like it might segue. One thing that environmental advocates talk about is the risk that arises in asking for something that is conventionally not up for discussion. They talk about real risks to careers and funding for their organizations. So, is this a reflection of the old school economy over the environment type of thinking? How do we stop the decimation of the very environment that sustains us and all of the animals that we have no right to disturb if people feel attacked for trying to do that work? It's as though it's like a taboo. How can we freshen our perspective on that? Do we just need to let go of an old way of doing things? What is it?
Well, I just think in general, whether you're a scientist or a filmmaker, not to be coming at the natural world, in such an extractive way, thinking of it just from like a purely utilitarian perspective. I think that that's something that if we can kind of make a shift in, we'll all be better off for it. Because certainly, I was a scientist. Like science, I believe it needs to continue and it needs to happen. But I think the way it happens is always really important. And the culture on a scientific team or on a filmmaking team, the tone that filmmakers set is really important too.
Thank you. Shane?
Yeah, I'm always kind of trying to look for also solutions that can benefit, both parties. I mean, I feel that there's so much advancement in technology that we can apply to some of these conflicts to find a better do things a better way. I mean, the whole ideology of manifest destiny in the West and tame and conquer. I mean, there's a large sect of people out here in the West that just are so rooted in that mindset. Even if the technology is there and the means and wherewithal to change, they still want it the old way. And it's, to me, that's the complicated thing to get over, and then just keep pushing for better technologies that that can keep our modern civilization, but do it in a with a lighter touch on the environment.
Right. So, what can advocates do? And I mean, it's a little bit different for artists. I think artists can say what's on their mind mostly. But advocates who, are at risk of losing their seat at the table if they push too hard for conservation measures. What's the best moderating source to be able to have a strong stance and not get booted off the table?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Dick Goen would just tell you to stick with it, right? Nobody stays committed to anything for their entire lives anymore. So I think that that's one thing maybe people can get back to is really committing to things and being dedicated and realize that things sometimes take a long time. And sometimes things take a long time and we're better off for that too. So I do think kind of thinking about staying committed to things over the long haul, over your lifetime is really important. And not being afraid. If you get booted off of one table, there's always another table for you. You have to create your own space sometimes for your voice. So I don't know. I'm not one to really kind of live with that fear. So, but I would encourage people to stay committed to things and not give up.
Thank you. Any further thoughts on that, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, I would just keep the pressure up on the politicians that are tasked with listening to us and making decisions, and not really worrying about getting kicked out of like an environmental room or something. I mean, sometimes it could just be talking to yourself in that room. So, change is, going to be a lot of direct action. I mean, I think the Klamath story is a great lesson in the importance of direct action, never giving up, and just pound, even if that door seems impossible to knock down, just keep trying and keep putting on the pressure. A lot of this stuff doesn't have much time to wait. So I think we need to kind of turn up our actions, start being more aggressive.
Yeah, and I suppose the more the public gets involved, the easier it is to get done.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Shane, have the mysteries been solved on which summer steelhead, the residents versus the returning? It looked like your film asked a few questions. They were looking for, which ones were the stocks that had been there since the dams had closed them in versus the ones coming back. Is there updates on that?
Yeah, so there was a science report that was published maybe 6 months ago based off some of the genetic work that was going on that trip. And it confirmed the hypothesis that all those adult summer steelhead were, you know, they were their parents were rainbow trout up in the headwaters. So they were all related and interconnected. And that gives so much hope for other dam removals possibilities across the West, is that there's all these areas where there are landlocked rainbow trout that are holding these ancient genetics. And as soon as the barriers are gone, these creatures are able to re-express anadromy, and it's amazing how they can do that after 100 years. Remember that there's an ocean out there, but it's locked away in this genetic. Unfortunately, salmon, like the spring salmon and the summer salmon, aren't the same. There aren't resident juvenile salmon up there, so that's really, this is kind of a problem of Elwha recovery, is that really early spring genetic variant. There's hardly any of those left, and those were the fish that did occupy. Those were the big salmon, the 100-pound salmon that did occupy the upper watershed, and they didn't have that genetic, gene bank, if you will, of the rainbow trout and the steelhead. Wasn't that kind of a relationship? So once we lose spring Chinook, summer Chinook genetics, we got to wait 15 million years to get them back. And, that's an ancient gene. It can't be re-evolved. So
Say that one more time. How long?
like 15 million years is about how long some of those genetics took to evolve. The run timing gene in salmon and steelhead, steelhead have adapted this life history to protect over certain things, like, um, you know, like for example, back when, an adaptation like a landslide could come down and act as a barrier or a dam, and that resident population, could hold those genetics and be able to re-express anadromy, just like we saw in the Elwha. But salmon don't have that. They don't have that resident life history that they could store that genetic information in. So that's why it's so important to protect the last remaining genetics for these spring and summer early run timing salmon species. I've heard they're going to start looking into the Elwha salmon genetics right now to figure out what percentage have that gene that's left, but it has been an issue recolonizing the upper basin of the Elwha. We're only seeing the Chinook up to the canyon, where we're seeing steelhead all the way to the headwaters. I think we only saw like maybe one Chinook on our whole snorkel, that upper section. So some are making it up, and it's going to take time, because those are the ones you want up there. The ones that are making it up on their own, those are the ones with the strong genetics that will repopulate. But it's not like you can expect this huge recovery in the headwaters of those spring and summer Chinook, because they're as fast as we saw the steelhead, because there wasn't that natural gene bank up there.
And the spring Chinook are really important for the southern resident killer whales, aren't they?
They were the most important of all salmon, because they were the biggest. They're the fattiest. They return at a time of year when the whales need them the most, when there's not much food around, and we really got to do a better job in trying to bring them back.
Is that what we need to restore also on the Snake River?
Absolutely, and that's what's predicted to go extinct in the next 15 years. Time is really of the essence. That, like, genetic, the wild genetic, and that's something that hatcheries can't. We cannot rely on hatcheries. We have to have that original pure genetic, because eventually you're going to have to bring that genetic back into the hatcheries to breed fitness, just so they stay alive. You can't crossbreed the same fish forever, so you need it adapted in its natural environment.
Oh, so its hatchery is finite, because if you can't infuse the hatchery fish continuously with wild genetics, then they will fizzle out.
Yeah, I mean, salmon select their partners. They select. It's survival of the fittest, and they that's why they turn different colors, and the males get big stripes and hook jaws. Like, the females get attracted to these different characteristics of natural selection, and in a hatchery, you're kind of doing that, and you don't know if you're selecting a weak with a weak or a strong with a weak, and you know that's a major problem with artificial propagation. Is we're interfering in that process of making the strongest, most adaptive animals that will be resilient to these crazy climate impacts we're seeing as well.
Shane, where do you stand on? I remember reading about one of the theories about why the salmon weren't also making up the Elwha was because they were actually homing to the hatchery, which is in the lower river. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just a problem with hatcheries as well. Is that if you rear something, yeah, the majority will go back to that spot where they can smell, and with their olfactory glands, they're attracted to that area. So yeah, in the lower 3 miles of the Elwha hatchery, it's just stacked full of salmon, and there is straying occurring, there is natural spawning occurring, and that was evident with the one fish we saw way up in the headwaters. But we also saw when we were electrofishing some juvenile Chinook up there too. So some had already reproduced, which was an encouraging sign. Um, but I think is this new we're basically in the golden age of genetics right now, and a lot of this stuff, uh, finding this new run timing gene, the greb1l gene that makes the spring chinook different than the fall chinook. That's a pretty recent discovery, and I'm hoping now that these tools are available, that they can be implemented to do better hatchery practices where we need hatcheries, where you can actually genetically look at what you're breeding, rather than just taking a bunch of smolts that you have no idea if they're homozygous or heterozygous, or and breeding them all together. So I'm hoping that yeah, science will catch up, and but there's no replacing the wild. We got to keep the wild genes going, no matter what it takes.
And in order to do that, we have to have restored rivers.
Absolutely.
There's just no replacement. Jennifer, Dick and Goen in your film talked about the juveniles that died immediately upon passing by the mill in Port Angeles. Is that correct? I was rather struck by that. He said they would come down, and as soon as they got to the mill, they'd go belly up. And is that because of toxins that were being dumped there?
Yeah, they were, pushing all kinds of bad stuff out of the mills. I mean, he worked at the mills for over 40 years. I think he would say 41 and a half years. And that was really one of the things that finally pushed him over the edge to become more of an activist. He would have never called himself an activist, but I think, working for the mills that were powered by the dams, and then seeing not only that the dams were blocking the fish and the destruction to the river ecosystem at large, I think just seeing the other kinds of pollution and damaging impacts that the mills were having on the environment really pushed him to starting to speak up more publicly, even though he was working for the very place that was kind of responsible for the damages.
So those must have been some pretty toxic waters, just dumping chemicals right there in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then, so it seems different types of salmon have different tolerance levels for different chemicals, like we see with, which ones are down in South Puget Sound, Shane, with the tire runoff? Is that chum or
I
coho?
think those are coho.
Coho.
Yeah.
So
Really
different salmon don't all react the same to different chemicals then.
Well, they have different life history strategies. So out of like the 6 salmon species, there's different, for example, like a coho salmon is super sensitive to freshwater environments because it spends 2 years in fresh water, kind of like a steelhead. They're very similar. Whereas like a pink salmon or a chum salmon, they only spend like a couple days in fresh water from when they hatch, and they go straight out to the salt. So all these salmon species have this whole family tree of salmon have originated kind of based off sockeye, and then kind of created these really diverse life histories based on habitat niches, and when they emerge, when they go to sea, where they go to sea. Also, they can seed as much habitat in these river systems as possible. So, like pink salmon and chum salmon stay low in the river. Spring Chinook and summer Chinook go way high. Um, and it's really fascinating. It kind of fuels this whole river ecosystem at different times of the year in different places within the river system. It's a natural miracle.
I have a feeling, well, it sounds like if this was a well-oiled machine before we came and set it topsy-turvy, like a really well-oiled machine, and obviously not without consequences and cascading effects to everything around them in the ecosystems and other animals, and timing, culture even of animals that might saunter by at a certain time in a certain place. Um, and now, we are still kind of feeling like nature is abundant. We know it's resilient, but how many salmon runs are there left in the world? And what about the ones that have been exterminated? Is there any chance for some of them to come back up in the UK or the East Coast? I mean, are these salmon completely gone now?
Well, Shane probably, since he's still working on these things, will give a better answer. But I'm in New York, and the Atlantic salmon have, have not been around the Northeast for quite some time. So there's been some interesting dam removal projects in Maine and parts of the Northeast. Some needed dam removal in places like Maryland. But when people think of salmon in the States, they think of the Pacific Northwest. So, but I am hopeful that some of those runs can come back. And I do think that, projects like the Elwha, will be a model for many rivers around the world, to show people what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's only gone if we lose the genetics, right? And in each one of these species is highly adapted to their own environment genetically. But nature also throws surprises, right? Like, I'll take Argentina, for example. We planted Chinook down there maybe, I don't know, 40 or 50 years ago. And now Argentina has the largest Chinook, largest size of Chinook in the world. Um, Somehow, there's like one of those places in the world where they were Chinook from up here that we planted down there and then just stopped planting and let them adapt. And because there's no commercial fishing, down in South America, these fish have just become monster, 90, 100-pound Chinook down there. Um, Same thing in, New Zealand. They took some Chinook down from the now extirpated run in the upper Sacramento River in California. So we've kind of put these different species around the planet, and in some cases like Argentina and New Zealand, it's actually preserved the genetics of somewhere like the upper Sacramento that are wiped out. So if we did ever need to do a reintroduction, at least we know where to go. A big problem with reintroduction of spring Chinook and summer Chinook in the Klamath is that 100 years ago they were wiped out from the upper headwaters, and those fish were specifically genetically adapted. So pretty optimistic we're going to see fall Chinook return to the upper Klamath when the dam removals are out, but it's still a huge scientific question how to get spring Chinook salmon back when there's only 100 left in the whole river system and down in a lower river tributary that's adapted there. So I just think I think we need to be extra cautious once again and preserve where we have these gene pools.
Yeah, it sounds like the precautionary principle should be used liberally at this point on this planet. I'm curious. So, for the Elwha dams, how is it that those dams still operated even though their licenses had expired?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting question. It's like, and one of the dams, by the way, was in the bounds of a national park, so Olympic National Park. So the story of the Elwha had all kind of shenanigans going on, and the federal government even authorized an act in the early 90s to supposedly restore the Elwha, but then threw no money at the actual project. So I think this is one of the things that really fueled people like Dick going, and he wasn't alone. There were a lot of people that worked on this for decades to get these dams down and help bring that river back. So yeah, that's a good question, and I'm sure it's going on in other places too, where the people responsible for the dams are not really taking care of them or, kind of responsible for what's happening with kind of the lifespan of a dam. I mean, those dams were going to come down one way or another. They were decrepit.
What do you think, Shane, about expired hydropower dam licenses?
Well, I think the Endangered Species Act is our number one tool to address that issue. And fortunately, a lot of these are run under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and fortunately, in the next like 10 to 30 years, there's like a lot of renewals coming up. So we'll be able to readdress Endangered Species Act issues where there's fish passage issues. So I would expect a lot of momentum.
That's interesting. Well, and then Representative Mike Simpson's salmon concept, Representative Simpson from Idaho, which you're probably both aware, Jennifer, hopefully you are too, with his proposal that he just came out with that would fund all kinds of stakeholders up front and breach the dams in 10 years for the lower Snake River dams. But within that is the moratorium litigation for 35 years. And then for watershed partnerships, a 25-year moratorium on the ESA, as well as the Clean Water Act, and automatic extension of hydropower licenses. So, there's a lot of tension kind of going back and forth right now within the advocacy community, a lot to do with, negotiating and how do you keep the conversation moving forward. But to even consider putting a moratorium on the ESA and Clean Water Act, I mean, what could even be done at that point if you needed to hold somebody accountable? You'd have no tools left.
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say we have no tools left. I don't think that's helpful in moving forward. But I do think, people need to take it seriously and realize that there are large forces at work and things in place that, make it hard to get these things done. So, people need to pay more attention. Attention's a currency. That's why we say pay attention. So I think time is definitely now to pay attention to a lot of things.
What do you think, Shane, about the...
Mm-hmm. I would use the Simpson opportunity as this is a great way to start the conversation and start negotiating. There's some things I think are great in it. Obviously, dam breaching is great, and there's other things that are great, but there's some things that freak me out, like what you talked about, the moratorium on, addressing ESA and Clean Water Act, and then also including, like the Willamette Basin and some of the lower Columbia tribs. It's not really fair for the people that live there to kind of write off those huge watersheds. At the same time, knowing that there might only be 10 to 15 years of these genetics in some of the best habitat in the Columbia Basin. A lot of negotiating and we need to do.
Yeah. Again, the more the public gets involved and writes and telephones our delegates, probably the easier the job would be to get it done. What about the whales, the southern residents? Do we, if spring Chinook in the Snake River Basin and other runs, some people have written them off. Other people, you say 15 years. I mean, of course, nobody knows, but I assume we shouldn't be cutting it down to the wire quite that close. We don't want to swoop in and breach the dams just as they're about to vanish forever. How can we push this along and possibly get breaching much sooner, like this year or next year? How can we get those dams breached sooner than later?
Sooner than later. That's always the the question. I just think it's keeping the pressure on and staying consistent, trying to find consensus across different stakeholders and different people, And I think just holding up a story like the orcas, showing, really that they're a great example of how everything is connected. So, the more kind of storytelling and the more connections that you can help people see, I think that will really help with kind of keeping the fire stoked under people's feet.
I think we need some pressure. We need to hear from our elected representatives here in Washington that have been completely silent over the past couple of months. It's unlikely we're ever going to have a conservative Republican in Idaho even mention the words dam breaching ever again, and we need to seize this opportunity and really get to the table with Simpson and all the politicians from the Northwest, and just ignoring it and being silent isn't doing anyone any favors. And I feel like that's what's happening right now. So I would ask Cantwell and Murray and Inslee and everybody here in Washington, like, what's the plan? How are we going to seize this opportunity and sit down at the table and come up with a solution? We can't just ignore it like is going on right now.
No, we can't. I seem to recall some footage in one of the Elwha Dam movies of Senator Cantwell and Murray at the ceremony looking pretty happy that it was happening.
Yeah, you mean at the official kind of dam removal ceremony in September of 2011? I think it was September 17th of 2011. There were all sorts of people there, actors and activists and political officials. And that was a really important day. And it was great that all those people were together. But how people forget, So, and I think, if I may, as a public health doctor, I just think, this is also a public health issue, really thinking about how our health is connected to the health of the environment. And if our political leaders don't get that now in this moment, I wonder if they ever will.
Thank you. Yeah. Shane, do you recall seeing Cantwell and Murray at the Elwha Dam breaching ceremony?
Yeah, and I've been to their offices in DC and seen the salmon jumping pictures on the wall. But I'm just like, I mean, all that's come out is this kind of really vague statement right after Simpson released it from, the politicians in Washington and Oregon. And look, these dams are in Washington. We need some leadership to actually drive this conversation forward and actually have a conversation and have some public discourse around this.
Do you think that those two gals are worried about breaking the ice, that once they open that lid and make anything more than a benign statement, that they're going to just be hauled in and there's no way they can be seen actively stifling the breaching of the Snake River dams? Do you think they just feel like it's so risky to even broach the subject?
I think there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes with like the Bonneville Power Administration's power over elected officials in the state, because we do get a lot of our energy from there, a lot of these utilities. So I don't know what that's just speculation. I have no idea, but I sure would like to find out.
Isn't that a little odd? They are our public servants, our U.S. senators, and nobody knows what they're thinking.
It's just been crickets.
It doesn't quite seem democratic to me. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, we all need power. I mean, probably the power at my house right now is coming from the Bonneville Dam, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't start having this conversation. I mean, Bonneville is also going bankrupt right now because it's being undercut by all the renewables in California, losing a huge part of its market. So there's a lot of economics at play, and there's solutions to be talked about. We just have to have the conversation.
Right. We should not be locked out of our public servants' offices. That should be transparent. I think there's a big lesson. It often feels when it comes to working to prevent the extinction of the southern residents that there's such an incredible species to work for, because everything that is contributing to their extinction, that is happening right now as we speak, backs up all the way to the human issue, the human problem, the human systems, and it connects every one of those dots in between. And salmon is one of those big dots. It's transparency, it's accountability, it's our politicians, democracy, democratic participation. It's like if we can solve the issues that are contributing to the extinction of the southern residents, we will also be solving really endemic problems that affect us in every other way in our society. You ever get that feeling?
Absolutely. We're
All
that
the
to the
time.
point.
Yeah, and I think too with with rivers and salmon and whales, the metaphors abound. So I think I don't know. I think about that all the time. The last documentary that I produced was a feature documentary about kindness, and I thought so much about Dick Goen and his fight for the salmon and the Elwha River. So I definitely think it's all connected.
Any thoughts in there, Shane?
Yeah, it's all connected. And unfortunately, like as far as like recovering like salmon, salmon recovery's become a huge business in itself, and salmon management is a huge business. And now we've created this artificial business that's more worried about like maintaining jobs than actually recovering species or like maintaining the status quo. And I mean this goes all the way down to the educational systems. I studied fisheries biology and had to go through it as well. On day three, we're at the hatchery, learning about that in fisheries biology. So I think we need to fundamentally kind of change some of the educational institutions and what we're teaching the next generation about managing resources and rivers and power and salmon and how it's all connected different than how we're doing it now with more of a vision for a more sustainable future. And Yeah, we just got to keep up the pressure on our politicians.
Yeah, we're coming out of, I don't know, I guess I would say centuries or millennia of old school thinking. My own father would throw a tire on the burn pile and douse it with diesel to get it going if the burn pile was wet. There's just old practices that die hard, and the economy versus the environment. There traditionally was no room for the environmental concerns within economy. Now we have a global movement called the Rights of Nature, which seeks to give legal rights to nature. That's entirely new and sure seems like it would come before the economy. You can't have an economy without a healthy planet, and you can't have life without a healthy planet. So, are you guys, either of you, familiar with the rights of nature? Do you have any view? We've got a few minutes left, but if you have any of your own personal viewpoints on, the rights of nature, either legally or just intrinsically.
Well, I guess just, chiming in on, I always have a hard time with people framing anything old as bad. I think that's one of the things I learned from Dick Goen is, how do you restore something that you can't remember? There's a lot of wisdom from elders that we need to hold on to. So I'm definitely a fan of kind of more of a hybrid strategy of old and new, but I definitely hear what you're saying. But I just want to, remind us all that, that wisdom exists. And I think that's some of what's lacking in our educational systems. It's helping people know like what a salmon is, other than seeing it on their plate for dinner that they buy wrapped in plastic in a supermarket. So anyway, my little shout out for old anything. Maybe I'm just becoming a Luddite. I don't know.
We've passed on a lot of knowledge throughout the generations, and we are who we are today. I mean, the farmers, old school farmers, people of the land, a lot to learn from. Yeah.
Case in point, indigenous wisdom. I mean, they knew spring Chinook were separate from fall Chinook forever, and our science just caught up with that, in the last couple of years. So.
Oh, can you elaborate on that? We only have a couple minutes left, but now you're saying the indigenous understood something that we've only just scientifically shown ourselves?
Yeah, they they knew the difference between the two Chinook species were different animals. They were, returned a different time of the year. They part of different cycles of the environment. And, when fisheries managers came along, they just lumped all Chinook into one management regime. And that's what's gotten us into this big trouble right now. Like all Chinook go out into the ocean and all the ocean fisheries just catch Chinook, even though if it's got these special genetics. And here we are, we just found out they're genetically different. And it's like the indigenous folks, at least down the Klamath, were like, we told you so. Like, so yeah, I believe in the combining the ancient wisdoms and as well.
That's a fascinating story. What else? I mean, when we hear about the wisdom of the indigenous people, we don't always hear specific stories or pieces of knowledge that go along with that. But that's a very concrete one right there. I wonder how much there is left. We've got about 1.5 minutes left, and I'd love to hear any of your closing thoughts and wishes, as well as thank you for your tremendous work, both of you.
Thank you for continuing to do the work that you do and to give films a platform. The Memory of Fish, I started 12 years ago. So it's really great that it still has a life. It's become this kind of evergreen story that's filled with just tools for inspiration, but it's also bittersweet because there's still a lot of rivers that need help. So anyway, the power of story, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thanks for the opportunity and the discussion. We need more discussions around these topics that affect us all in our public commons and the public trust. So just grateful for that.
I'm going to go ahead and assume that the work that you guys are doing is more than just a job for both of you, that it's something you're both passionate about.
For sure. It has to be. Otherwise, you'd probably do something else.
Do it all for the money.
Well, you guys are both tremendous. I think we've got to wrap it up now. We've had our hour, but as usual, I could sit around the campfire with both of you and just chat till dawn about all of this great stuff. So hopefully we'll have you back and get to see more of your future projects.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully we can be in person at the Friday Harbor Film Festival next fall.
Absolutely. Would love to see you both here.
Great.
Great. Well,
appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day,
Bye.
and we will see you next time around. And thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Friday Harbor Film Festival. Take care.